Hello and welcome to my short demo on what's new in Photoshop CS6. My name is Ludmilla Adams, the creator of Fashion Chalkboard. Thank you for watching. Alright, so here we are in the Photoshop environment, and shockingly as it seems, the new interface is really contrasting to the artwork that I have here, but no worries, you can easily switch it back. Right under your edit preferences, you have something in here called interface. And in here you can definitely set this back to your most preferable environment. But I say give it a try in the default, perhaps black or darker color, and see how you'd like to use that. Okay. One hint to easily find out what's new in CS6 is actually if you go to Window and Workspace, and if you go in here and say New in CS6, you'll see a lot of different panels here that are all offering something new. There's something new inside of each one of these blue highlights, so check it out. But let me go ahead and talk about what to me as a fashion designer slash textile designer are some of the features that I think are most exciting. Okay, so one of the very first things that I think is really exciting, and I'm going to just create a new document. For that, I'm just going to press Ctrl N. I'm going to just say US paper, 8.5 by 11, 150. And one of the most exciting parts to me is that we can actually now use our vectors pretty much almost exactly the same way that we can do it inside of Illustrator, which is we can put a fill and a stroke or set the fill to none. I'm actually here in CS5 and I have prepped a little file, and I'm going to just copy this, and this was Illustrator, and we're back into Photoshop CS6, and I'm going to paste this, and it's going to ask me, and let me just undo that one. It's going to specify here that I need to copy this, and in here I'm going to just go to paste, and it's going to ask me what I want to paste this as, and I'm going to say shape layers. And you can see the default here is a black fill, and I can set this immediately to none. And I can come now to this new submenu here where we have a stroke. We can here now independently from the fill set up how thick we want this stroke to be. So that's neat. So you guys know this from Illustrator. You can put gradients and we can put patterns in here. Also, we now have the option to set a stitch. Now for this it's a little bit more complicated, because what you need to start paying attention to is that pretty much as we have in Illustrator, we have sub layers where the stitch would be separate from a outline. So what I found is that it's easy for you to take this shape, duplicate this, and then let's just look at this copy here, and then we can work from here. And make sure when you work with your vectors that you use your path selection tool and your direct selection tool. I'm going to use my direct selection tool. I'm going to just come highlight all these anchor points, delete them, set this to none, and then finally set this here to something like a stitch. We have more options here, and similar as in Illustrator, we can set our dash and our gap, and we can make our caps round, and so forth and so forth. So let's say here we have this for 2, and we don't want this round, square. You all know how this works. Now, the reason I had to separate this out, and we'll just lift this up so you can see this, is because let's just say I wanted to work only with one layer, and you can easily make this one layer, but if I press Shift to highlight both and then Control E or Command E to merge, you can see how it takes the attribute from one over the other and it applies this to both of these vectors. So that's the only disadvantage, that you kind of still have to work as if it's in Illustrator sub-layers, but as long as you have these options here, you can accomplish quite a bit inside of Photoshop. So that's really exciting news, and you can obviously play around with that. Alright, so moving right along. The second thing is more for our textile designers, but obviously everybody else kind of wanted to hear about this too, which is a new options that we have now, which is for patterns. And I'm going to just go ahead, and I prepped some of these flowers, switching back to my regular move tool. And I'm going to just go ahead and say define pattern. And you can see here I called them flowers for scripted patterns. That's alright. I'm going to just take this out, create an empty new layer. And then we're going to go into edit, fill, and you can see how it's blue, so there's something new in here. We're going to pick these flowers, scroll all the way to the bottom, and that's not new, right? But down here we have something called scripted patterns, and we're going to just go ahead and find something called spiral. I'm just going to randomly fill this here. You can see that that's not really showing you much because the area that I defined was way too large, so let me just make this smaller, something like this. So once that's selected, I can go and define this as a pattern, and then once more deselect, edit, fill, pick the newest one, which is the smaller one here. You can see how the other one has a large empty area around it. And then let's see here, I'm going to say let's do the spiral first. There's unfortunately no preview here, but we can just see that, and that's pretty nice. Let's create another empty layer, edit, fill. We can try a brick weave and see how that comes out with these flowers. So that's quite boring here. We can try that again with a different pattern in a moment. Edit, fill. Let's see what a cross weave would look like. Also kind of not really interesting at this pattern, so you have to kind of play with different images that you define. The random fill. So if you do that a couple of times, and just see how I'm adding that on there, you can see that each time it's random. Create another empty layer. Let's fill that one more time. There we have some symmetry, and took the color out. Let's bring it back. You can see how it kind of changed my color right there, and that's quite pretty. Alright, so then let's see where the brick weave would perhaps make a little bit more sense. So I'm just going to create a rectangle and give it not too much of a loud pattern, but on this empty layer I'm just going to create this right here, and let's put also a stroke line around it. Maybe change this a little bit so it's more obvious. There we go. Not so fat. And maybe solid. Alright. Gonna throw a selection right around this here. And I'm going to define this as a pattern. Empty layer, take that selection out, edit, fill, this time go to this new one, and let's see what we will receive when we say brick fill. So that wasn't too exciting. What about cross weave? And that becomes a little bit more interesting. So now we can start working with scale here. So this is quite large. If we transform, make it smaller, select this one, edit, define pattern, and let's create another fill, the smaller size, and there you see that you have a more interesting result. Okay, now if I make my selection even smaller and just stay within that color, you can see how we're now getting a real interwoven result. Okay, so here I created a file, and this file has a bunch of different trials of new brushes that we have. And let me just kind of go over what these are. These are the ones really nice. We have a watercolor build-up, and I kept all my brushes at 100 points. So if I go to brushes, and if we go to the drop down menu up here, you can see that there's a lot of these different shapes right here. And we have two sets. One are the type of airbrush watercolor on canvas type of textures, and then we have something brand new which is called erodible brushes, and I'll play with that in a minute. But first off, these here are really nice for you to kind of play with. If you click on them, and then if I just start rubbing, you can see that if I go really lightly, I have a little bit of color, and if I start pulling really hard on it on my Wacom tablet, because it's pressure sensitive, the color becomes more dense. Okay, so I kind of have this file here that you probably can create for yourself too, so that you can see an example, and the names for these brushes are once again in this menu, and if you hover over it, you should get like a little cursor tip right here. And what I did then is kind of play around with one of my croquis that I had, and you can see how I'm playing around with different textures. So all I needed to do here is have my croquis active, and then I just took my magic wand tool, so that layer is active, and just click in the area that I wanted to color, create an empty layer, pick a color, say something like this, and then pick one of your new brushes and just start painting away inside of it. Okay, so I did that for quite a bunch of layers, and then if you want to test how this looks, just create an empty, or a white rather, layer, and you can see how I stayed within my selections here, and it gives us a nice little effect for these different ones. So just once again, here's one that I had a selection for the neck, the hair, the jacket, and I kind of referred back to my now kind of library of brush examples, and I'm gonna make this file available as a download, so just keep coming back to my site, and then you'll see one day that it'll be up there, probably within the next 2 days. Okay, alright, so that's another great example. I was also starting to talk about the erodible brushes, so that's something entirely different. So for that, let me just bring back this layer, just so we have something empty. And the fun part about these is that first of all, you can see the new type of brush right here, and the important menu is really this one right here, which is your brush presets. And when you're on it, you can see right here it says erodible point. You can sharpen your tip. So what it actually does, it lets you break down the tip, and you have a little preview right here, and the softer the tip is, the harder it's gonna be for you to break it down. But if I make this, actually if it's softer, so here, then it breaks down. So watch how this is now sharp, and then if I start drawing with it, you see how it's eroding right there. Okay, so this is quite fun. You can start off with different shapes for the tip. You can see how the preview changed right here, and you can always obviously go back to the point one and sharpen it. And then just the thing to remember is whether you want it to break down, so that you then have a different effect with it. And you can see how, depending on where I press with my Wacom, the shape of it differs quite a bit. So if I now kind of tilt to the other side, kind of takes away from that. Alright, and you can always, for any of these even your airbrushes, you can always create a new preset. So if you start playing around with all these different options that you have, you can always save it.